Hello and welcome to Skeptic's Forge. I'm Phoenix Nightingale. Now, I'm going to be continuing on with my review of A Skeptic's Search for God by Ralph Muncaster. But before I do, I want to go over a couple of things. First off, I will only be quoting from the book when I need to, when I am going to be critiquing a certain aspect of it. That way I can make use of the fair trade or fair use copyright laws and not actually uh, get hit with any kind of plagiarism or anything along those lines. And secondly, a review of what we went over on the cover. There are plenty of things on the cover that were, you know, I talked about the way that elements on the cover used for advertisement swaying your positions one way or the other. But for the rest of the book, all I'm really going to be looking at are the claims on the cover that can actually be verified. So here we have that the author went through 1,456 hours of Sunday school and church, and that somehow turned him into a hardcore atheist and a skeptic of the Bible. And not just any skeptic, but a cynical skeptic. So we can actually look at, as he goes through, and see if his behavior matches to those um, descriptors for those labels. And that with him holding that position, a 3-year search that the book covers convinced him that a God existed. And not just any God, but the biblical God. And that the Bible itself matched several scientific facts, one right after the other, in biology, history, archaeology, and physics. So those are the claims that I'll be looking for in the book to see if it actually maps to what evidence he provides. Let's go for a ride. All right, so here we are. Part 1, How I Became an Atheist in Church. Chapter 1, The Child Skeptic. Now, I did say that I wasn't going to read out of this unless I had something to say on anything, but he has an italicized section right here up front that's only a paragraph long that he does not repeat this formatting anywhere else in the book. And there is so much going on in this. I am going to go ahead and read it off and detail every single last thing in it. So this will be my, right off the bat, already an exception to my rule. Life can be so bizarre. Who would imagine that 3 boys raised with 4,368 hours of Sunday school and church teaching between them would turn into 2 hardcore atheists and an agnostic only a few years later? What fed the move into atheism? Who would think that the most ardent atheist and Bible basher, me, would later agree to a challenge to prove that the Bible really was a fairy tale? Even more surprising, who would ever think that my quest would result in a life-changing discovery? Now, this doesn't seem like much on the surface, but that's where you can easily be misled. There's a lot to say about what goes on in here. First off, life can be so bizarre, sets you up going, bizarre, okay, it's priming you to have some conflicts going on, stuff that you don't expect to see. And what goes on in this really is telling of who his audience is supposed to be. Who would imagine that 3 boys raised with 4,368 hours? Now, why this number? This number stands out quite a bit. Now, with the there's a tactic in Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, FBI hostage negotiator, who's now written about how to sell the deal, basically. Negotiations in business and pretty much anything else in life. But with that book, it points out that using a big number with a big non-round number makes you automatically think highly calculated It's impressive that it's a big number, and that it's not even makes you think calculated, and therefore that you're putting a lot of thought into the whole thing. And autumn is a form of framing. Now, framing, let's go with your typical um, let's go with this car salesman. If you have a bracket that he could sell it in, he can sell within this range here. If he or buy or sell within that range, he's going to want to buy low, sell high. So what he'll do is, if he's going to buy from you, he's going to tell you this is the range that he can buy, that you know he can buy it in, the money that he can give you. And he's going to tell you that this little range right here is actually the high end, when it's actually the low end. Likewise, when he's trying to sell a car, he'll give you a bracket up here that will end up going, okay, I'm going to give you the bottom end of the bracket. I'm going to give you a special deal, and it's going to be the bottom end of the bracket, but the numbers he gives you will actually be at the high end. The low end of what he's telling you is actually the high end of what he's allowed to give you. That's a common framing sales tactic. And this is very similar to that. And this whole paragraph actually is a huge frame job in that sense. Let's go back here again. Those hours of Sunday school and church teaching between them would turn into two hardcore atheists and an agnostic only a few years later. Now, this you feel like this is part where the bizarre already kicks in. You're thinking big number of a big number for the number of hours of church and Sunday school. So you're going, oh my gosh, it's a whole lot. But in reality, you crack down the numbers. Let's see here. How does this? Okay, so we got the 4,368 divided by 3 equals the same number, 1,456. It's on the back of the book. So that divided by 52 weeks in the year equals 28 hours that we need to disperse over however many years. We go through that, and this is where I find the sweet spot. Anywhere from 12 to 16 years worth of education with about 2 hours each. That's what I went through with my own religious education. Church, 1 hour of church plus 1 hour of Sunday school. So it's probably somewhere in that range for realism. Otherwise, he'll be starting at, this is 8 years old already, right here, typically, which is where I had First Communion. You have to go through a bit of Sunday school before you can have First Communion. And going down here, being born already, here we're already just going with, okay, he's able to talk versus going when he first starts going to school versus when I had my First Communion. And, and then this whole side over here, which can get ridiculous considering that now he's going to school, he has homework, and having more and more hours crammed in a day is beginning to get unfeasible. So it's really probably about 2 hours a week, which is not really that impressive. So why the big number? Like I said, you do a big number, it sounds more impressive, and it's not a round number, so it's not that, it makes you feel like they're more credible. That's it, plain and simple. It's just a move to get you to put more trust in what the person's saying. And then, of course, them turning atheist after that, to be perfectly honest, the most common means of an atheist, a person becoming an atheist, is from actually reading their holy text. Plain and simple. I don't know what the actual percentage is. I'm thinking it's in about the range of about 2/3 of all atheists became atheists because they read the Bible front to back. I could be wrong on that, but it's not that impressive. What fed the move into atheism? Well, I don't know about him, but like I said, for most it's learning a little bit of critical thinking and actually reading the biblical texts or the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita, whatever your holy text is, reading it with a critical eye and actually paying attention to what it actually says is what normally make somebody leave their faith and become an atheist. Who would think that the most ardent atheist and Bible basher? That's bad. And this is why. What has happened here is he's associated atheist and Bible basher. Bible basher already has negative connotations. So if you're a believer, you hear Bible basher, then you're automatically going to have a negative reaction to that. And now that you've had those two terms put side by side, that negative reaction to Bible basher is also going to be associated with atheist. And so you're already establishing a very strong emotional bias to atheism. And then it takes the atheist and Bible basher would later agree to a challenge to prove that the Bible was really a fairy tale. Fairy tale. There's another knee-jerk reaction. You're telling them that their book is a fairy tale, flat out. They're going to have another negative knee-jerk response. So in the same sentence, we have two very potent knee-jerk negative responses to what's being said, and having those associated to atheism. And so we're doing a very, very strong emotional bias setup from the start. Even more surprising, who would ever think that my quest would result in a life-changing discovery? Now, we know from the back of the book that the discovery is, back of the book cover, that discovery is, converting back to Christianity. He started in Christianity, raised Christian, and supposedly left it, and now is coming back to it. So that is the life-changing thing that's occurring in here. Now, what's wrong with that? No, there's nothing wrong with it. Deconversion. But the way that that's phrased, after all this negative setup with atheism, with non-belief, is that there's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. Forgive me, I forget the author. I don't have it on the shelf. I only have it in audiobook format. But in that book, it details your ways of thinking. It breaks it down into type 1, type 2 thinking. Your knee-jerk responses, your... oh, wow, I'm having a hard time remembering the term. Starts with an H. Heuristics, there we go. Your brain's heuristics. Your mental shortcuts for evaluating things. Your emotional responses, the instinctive responses, the things that you call intuition, oftentimes, which really are the heuristics and instincts. Your brain also processes information on a subconscious level afterwards, and people like to chalk that up to intuition as well. But no, and that's mostly all handled primarily by the limbic system, the old mammal brain, not the higher functioning neocortex. Type 2 is the higher functioning neocortex, the more critical thinking, the rational, reasonable brain that actually stops, goes, okay, and what I'm thinking, is that really correct? So he's already gone and thrust us into a type 1 thinking mode already with this, putting severe negative connotations on atheists. And now with this statement about, and then this life-changing event occurs, that is pulling you back out of that negative, going, okay, oh, it's like, oh my gosh, this is so horrible. I mean, he's already got a hardcore atheist, the Bible bashers. And it's like, but he came out of it. So now you have this wash of relief, all this negative energy built up, and then suddenly this wash of relief to calm you down and tell you it's going to be okay. All type 1 thinking that really sets into your head that what the book is going to say is going to be exactly what you would need to hear in order to convert somebody out of from atheism to back to Christianity. And there's one thing in the Thinking Faster Slow book about the type 1 thinking, a phrase that's used all throughout the book. What you see is all there is. It's a common tactic that we employ as a heuristic that is probably the number one thing that actually gets us into trouble when thinking about things critically. You start out with a limited set of data. And from that limited set of data, you build a narrative off of that data. But that's another form of framing. This is your mind sets up a frame. The narrative becomes a reality that you look, it becomes a reality, your perspective, the lens through which you view everything else from that point on. That narrative that you've generated off the limited data set is what you're saying is true. And you compare everything off of that from that point on. And that is a trap when your data set is small to begin with, because it doesn't matter how much more data you get, you're going off of this. So it tends to generate a confirmation bias when you're evaluating things. Anything that agrees with the narrative, you're going to go, okay, yeah, I'll take that, I'll take that. And anything that disagrees with it, you either ignore or reject, or you throw it out the window. So this one single short paragraph does all of that and ties it all into a very strong emotional narrative that's just going to lock you into that mindset, so that everything from that point on is going to be framed to bring you to the conclusion that the author wants you to reach, and not necessarily look at the facts. And so we're going to see how this ties into how he presents the rest of his evidence for the rest of the book. I would like to remind my viewers that Ralph Muncaster, at the time of writing this book, has at least an MBA in marketing and finance, 20 years of experience in marketing and advertising, 5 of which was being the president of his own advertising firm. And then, by the time of publishing this, also 10 years of running of his own ministry in a megachurch, where he has had ample time to apply his trade skills to his ministry. And that ministry is targeted at pulling people back into their beliefs. And to do that, you either use rational reasoning or you use manipulation tactics. And so far, I mean, we're just getting started, and he is going heavy on the manipulation tactics. And this is supposed to be what's supposed to pull people back into the faith, or to convert skeptics. If your skepticism is all about pulling yourself away from the emotional context of an argument and looking at the facts and evaluating the facts from a logical standpoint. Do they actually support the argument? But with this strong of a ploy for emotional manipulation from the get-go, I think it speaks volumes on the character of the author. Because there's no way he is not aware, with his credentials, of what he is doing by putting this up front like this.